Alright, for our last example from 10.4 that we'll do via video, um, we have the general form of what is a hyperbola. Now, how would I know that this thing is a hyperbola? I would look at the whole general equation. I would look for anything being squared. I see both x being squared and y being squared, so it's no longer a parabola because it would only have one of those things squared. I'm looking at it and both are squared, so it's either an ellipse or a hyperbola. And it's definitely a hyperbola because the x squared and y squared are not the same sign. And so what do? Well, you know what we need to do. We need to complete the square because you know we're hoping to get it in an x minus h squared form and a y minus k squared form and an equal to 1 with a minus sign in between and some numbers underneath. That's what we're shooting for. So we got to complete the square. So it's the x that's positive, so I'm going to leave that out front. I'm going to move the 4x with it, but I'm also going to leave some space. I'm going to move the minus y squared and put the plus 4y, and I'm going to leave some space, but I'm going to move over the 4. So this last 4 over there I added to both sides, only keeping the x's and the y's together but moving them close to one another. So I got to be really careful here because of the negative sign. So I can't just do this. I'm going to do it in red because it's so bad. If you do this, you will be wrong. Because if you distribute that negative now, you get a negative 4y, which isn't in there in the beginning. So be very careful how you put your parentheses. That's why some books will teach factor by grouping, is for this very principle right here. So what should we do when we have a negative sign? We should group it so that the negative sign's incorporated with that other variable. So if you looked at your factor by grouping both in beginning algebra, intermediate algebra, if you look back at some of the completing the squares that we've done even in this class, we're really careful when there's a negative. So let's go to this first parenthesis. We cannot have a number with the x squared. It's got to be a 1. So I got to factor out the 2 from both of those terms. I can't have the negative with the y squared, so I got to factor it out. And that becomes a negative 4y in here. It's that important. And nothing really happened to either side. We just factored things out, so the 4 is just staying alone. So what do we have to add in here? I'll put it in green. Well, we got to add 1 in that first parenthesis. So we really added 2 to that side. And what do we have to add to the other one? I'll do it in like a purplish color. Well, I got to add half a negative 4 squared. Well, that's 4, right? That's negative 2 squared or 4. But what did I really add to that side? A minus 4. I really put on a minus 4 to that side, and so I got to do a minus 4 to the other side. So let's see what we have here. I'll go back to the black color. We have 2 times x plus 1 squared minus y minus 2 squared is equal to 2. So what do I do to finish? I divide everybody by 2. And it works out super nice. X plus 1 squared all over 1 minus y minus 2 squared all over 2 is equal to 1. And now we have the general form, the standard form of that hyperbola. Right? And so what do they want us to do with this? As we look at something like 58, they wanted us to find the center, the transverse axis, the vertices, the foci, and the asymptotes. Now we can, right? So you could, before you go crazy, right, you could go to the back of the book, look up something like 58, make sure we're doing it right, and we find that we are. And what do we see? That we have a center at negative 1, 2. That everything's happening to the x-axis. So our vertice is, well, that's a 1 underneath there. Square root of 1 is 1, so I got to subtract 1 to get to one of the vertices and add 1 to get to one of the vertices. And so I have the negative 2, 2 and the 0, 2. So what about my focus points? My focus will be, I'll put the F over here, but we'll go get it over here, we know that c squared needs to be equal to a squared plus b squared. So in this case, c squared is equal to 3, so c is root 3. So what do we have? We have negative 1 minus root 3 comma 2 and negative 1 plus root 3 comma 2. That's the best way we could write that. And those are beyond those two vertices. And then what are our asymptotes? So I'll put A there for asymptotes. Well, we know that it's y minus k is equal to the square root of what's underneath the y over the square root of what's underneath the x, not forgetting that there's two of them, so plus or minus x plus 1. And we get a y minus 2 is equal to plus or minus root 2 times x plus 1 as our two asymptotes. And they're also asked for a transverse axis. Everything's happening to the x, and so it should be x is equal to the x coordinate of the vertex. And as you look at the answers that are in the back of the book, they'll match just that. And they're asking you to graph it as well, but for time's sake, I'll leave the graphing to you since all those answers are in the back of the book.